Gedvach, I'm recording this in honor of Avi Solomon, who always walks. This week was a little bit cold, maybe a little more than a little bit. So I'll give a brief review of what we spoke about in the morning. I want to begin with a mashal. A mashal, like a lot of mashals begin, there was a king. He was going hunting. And he ended up in a situation where his life was in danger. There was a lioness attacking him. And there was a peasant, didn't even know he was the king. And he went and he saved his life. He was overwhelmed with gratitude, and he tells this peasant, he says, "You know, I'm the king. I'm going to reward you handsomely for saving my life." And this peasant didn't really believe him. He tells him, "You know, I'm the Pope. And this is what I do. I save people's lives. It's okay." Then 3 days later, when he gets summoned to the palace and he realizes that he really is the king, and the king tells him, "I want to reward you. But to give you gold and silver, I don't feel like I'm rewarding you. It means nothing to me. I have so much of it. To give you diamonds and jewels, it doesn't have value in my eyes. I want to give you something I will miss. Something that means something to me. You saved my life, and I want to appreciate it." And he's thinking, he goes, "I got it. My nightingale." The king had a bird, a nightingale, that whenever he was down, he would use to cheer him up. He'd have the bird sing for him. Whenever he had a simcha, he'd use his bird to celebrate. The nightingale. And he tells them to please pack up the nightingale and give it to this man. His servants were a bit surprised. They did as the king wished. And he thanked him, and he left with the nightingale. A few years later, the king was in that same area where this peasant lives, and he says he must go visit his nightingale. He thinks about that nightingale all the time. He has to go see how that nightingale is doing. And he knocks on this peasant's door, and now he's overwhelmed. Wow, the king at my door. He says, "Your Majesty, to what do I owe this honor?" He says, "I've come to check up on my nightingale." He says, "I'm sorry, Your Majesty, I don't know what you're referring to." "The bird. I gave you that nightingale. Don't you remember that story when you saved my life?" He goes, "Oh, sure, I remember that story. The bird. Yes. We came home that night, and I told my wife, it's a present from the king. We must eat it that night for dinner." And she tried making a dinner out of it, and she said it was very rough and tough meat. I actually didn't really get what the king's intention was, but due to her unbelievable culinary skills, she was able to make it into some type of very delicious dinner with a few side dishes, and we enjoyed it immensely. Yes, I should thank the king once again. And the king is confused and just walks away. Now this mashal could be used for a lot of different things. But I want to use it to discuss a point that Reb Chaim Shmulevitz Zecher Tzadik Livracha brings out in this week's parsha. Klal Yisrael was in Eretz Goshen, and it's mashma from the Psukim, had they stayed in Eretz Goshen, they never would have had a Shibud Mitzrayim. And once they started going out to Mitzrayim, entering politics, joining the Mitzrayim and everything, the Mitzrayim were overwhelmed. They were worried they're going to take them over. And they sat down, Hava Nischak Maloi. We have to outsmart these Jews. We have to get them not to take over our country. Says the Gemara in Soita Yud Aleph, or it's a medrash in this week's parsha also. Gimel Hoya Ba'isa Eitza. There were three in that Eitza: Bilam, Eov, and Yisroi. Bilam, Yisroi, and Eov. There were three in that Eitzah: Bilam, Eov, and Yisroi. Bilam gave the Eitzah to enslave Klal Yisrael. For that, he was killed. Eov, he was Shosak. For that, he got Yisura Eov. And Yisroi, because he ran away, he was Zoicha that his grandchildren sat on the Lishkas HaGazos. It has to be that giving the Eitzah is worse than just being quiet. So how's it possible that it seems Bilam did better than Eov? Bilam was killed. Eov got Yisure Eov. We don't understand. It's hard to comprehend what it means, Yisura Eov. Just think about the worst Yisurim you ever could think of. Somebody who never lost everything. He had everything going for him. He went through the concentration camps, but not with a Tzaras Harabim. A single person going through it. Not for a few years, for years and years. Yisura Eov. How is it possible Eov seemed to be punished worse than Bilam? Says Reb Chaim Shmulevitz, we see from here the value of life. Ma Yisron Adam V'Choy, the Pasuk in Eicha tells us that if a person would understand and comprehend how valuable life is, Tsaras would never bother him. Yisurim would never bother him. Rashi in Kedushin Daf Pei says that when Yisurim come, if a person understood life, it wouldn't bother him at all. Reb Chaim Shmulevitz explains this with a mashal. Imagine somebody just found out that he won the lottery. $80 million. And just then his kids tell him they broke a little dish. Maybe a crystal ball. Would it even bother him? The simcha of winning the lottery wouldn't even let him be bothered at all by the loss of this little crystal ball. Says Reb Chaim Shmulevitz, that's Pshat and Rashi. If a person understands the gift of life, the fact that he has tsaros wouldn't even bother him. We say in Hallel, Yasa Yisrani Ya, V'la'mavas lo'inasanani. Give me Yisurim. Yisurim I can handle. But don't give me death. Death I can't handle. And if a person understands that, he appreciates every moment of his life. And if not, he says a pasuk in Tehillim, Adam b'yoker v'lo yaven nimshel kabehema nidma. That if one doesn't understand the value of life, he's living like a behema. A behema is also alive, but he doesn't understand the value of life. And I heard a story recently. There was a Bacher Nebuch who was in a terrible car accident. His name was Moshe. The car was an accordion. He was in terrible shape. Every single part of his body had issues. He was fighting for his life in a hospital in New York. And they had a meeting. It's called the Ethic Committee of the hospital. The top doctors had to decide how to deal with him. They got briefed for about a half hour on all his conditions and everything that's wrong with him. And then the head doctor, the head of the ethics committee, his name was Dr. Morgan, got up and he says, we all understand the situation this boy is in. he must be in enormous, enormous pain. And even if we're going to give him one operation after the next operation, we wouldn't know which operation to do first. At the end of the day, after hundreds of thousands of dollars of medical bills, therapy, he's terrible, terrible pain. What kind of quality of life is this boy going to have after everything? He says, I move to say that we just give him as much painkillers as we can. Let him not feel the pain. And then let nature take its course. And he's going around the table taking votes, and all the doctors are voting. And they came to one from doctor, and he asked if he could say a few words. And he got up and he says, what right do we have to decide the fate of this young bacher? He's 19 years old. He has a life in front of him. Who are we to decide what his quality of life is or isn't? Who are we to decide whether he lives or dies? And then he said, we're all big doctors, successful in one of the biggest hospitals in New York. I'd like to go around the table and ask every doctor what they rate their quality of life. On a 1 to 10 scale, what would they rate their quality of life? And he started with this Dr. Morgan. This Dr. Morgan says, I'm not such a good judge. Recently got divorced. His kids don't talk to him. He says he'd have to say maybe a 6. And then he went on and on. The highest was a Dr. Bernard who gave himself a 7. And then he says, let's go ask this patient, let's ask this boy what he rates his quality of life. And they didn't want to make a whole scene, so this Dr. Morgan went, followed this Jewish from doctor. And he comes to this boy and he asks him, on a scale of 1 to 10, we need this for our research. It's very important to give us a thought-through, honest answer. What would you rate your quality of life right now on a 1 to 10 scale? And without blinking an eye, the boy says 10. Says Dr. Morgan pipes up and he says, no, we said 10 being the highest. You meant to say 1. He goes, no, 10. So the former doctor asked him, you're in bad shape, you're in a hospital. How do you give yourself a 10? And he tells him, I just finished saying Maidani. And every day when I say Maidani, I can't help to think to myself, I'm still alive. Looking at that car, I shouldn't have been alive. And I'm still alive. And that gives me the strength, and that gives me that I feel that I have a 10. Says Reb Chaim Shmulevitz, if a person understands the value of life, we realize that whatever Yisurei Iyov were, still, it was better than what happened to Bilam, because my Yisron Adam V'chai. If we appreciate our life, we would use it differently. There was a study done last week. The study was done over a while, but the results came out last week. Which country has the most people that are happy and the most unhappy people, in pain, the most people that have chronic pain, the most people that don't? And Americans came out the most unhappy people from all countries and the most prone to pain. More than Russia, more than China. Now they gave 3 different understandings how to understand it. But if a person would value his life and understand what it is, he would be able to appreciate every second of it. And not only that, we wouldn't waste our time. We would use it for mitzvahs, for ma'asim tovim. Somebody showed me an article just a little before about Leib was niftar. After he was sick and then he got up from his sickness, he literally didn't waste a second. He used every second for Torah mitzvahs. And when they asked him, he said he needs to know 3 things now: Torah, Torah, and Torah. because he had the value of what it means to be alive and how not to waste a second. Just imagine a guy wants to go on a beautiful vacation. He rents himself a house, $5,000 a night. And you know he's supposed to check in at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And you see him, 4 or 5 o'clock, Mincha Marav, you see what's going on here. Aren't you supposed to check in? He says, I'm too lazy. I don't know. Maybe I'll go tomorrow, maybe the next day. Have it for a whole week. You look at him like he's crazy. If one understands the value of what I have and what I could use every second, we wouldn't waste a second. And we should talk about Zeicha to appreciate my Yisro and Adam V'chai, to appreciate the value of life and to be able to use it out every second for what it's worth.